Morning and welcome to the legislative discussion about hate crimes in Massachusetts. My name is Sam Hyun and I am your moderator today, and I'm thankful that you all chose to spend your time to be a part of this critical discussion. I believe that we're discussing today is even more critical given what has happened in recent times, and as an Asian American, I feel that I have to name the hate and the violence towards my community, such as the mass murder in Atlanta where 6 of the victims were Asian women, and the nonstop violence directed at Asian and Asian Americans across the country. And I'm not, this is a reality that many of us across communities know has been the truth and of this country, that while many may not have realized it, that there has been a lot of hate and anger and pain that has been inflicted on millions of people throughout the duration of this country's history. And we have to name that and recognize that. But let me be clear, the legislation that we discussed today is a start. It's not going to eradicate hate, but it is a start of what I hope and what we hope is a united movement to make the world and this country and a Commonwealth a better place for us all. So please join me as we welcome our esteemed panelists: Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healey, State Senator Adam Hines, State Representative Tram Wynn, Deputy Chief of the Criminal Bureau of the Attorney General's Office, Asha White, the Executive Director of Lawyers for Civil Rights, Yvonne Espinoza Madrigal, and Evelyn Dolan. Thank you all for being here today, and we will begin the discussion with opening remarks from Representative Wynn. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sam, for kicking us off, and thank you all for joining us for this town hall today. It's been a hard year, but it only got heavier the past couple of weeks since the mass murder in Atlanta, Georgia, followed by the mass shooting in Boulder. And just this week, we saw a perpetrator violently attacking a 65-year-old Asian woman in Manhattan as she was on her way to church. I'm feeling angry, heartbroken, and I hope all of you, especially my Asian and Asian American and Pacific Islander friends and family, are taking time to prioritize their mental health during this very difficult time. This hate and violence need to stop. There is no place for this in our Commonwealth or anywhere. And as Sam mentioned, the rise in anti-Asian hate incidents did not come out of nowhere. There's been a long and troubling history of racism and discrimination against Asian people in this country, from major events such as the Chinese massacre in 1871, the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Japanese internment camps, all the way to microaggressions and outright racism that we face each day. Ask any Asian person, and I'm sure most of us will have stories to tell you of being ridiculed for the way we look, whether it's our slanted eyes or our small stature, for our accents for those of us who are newer immigrants, and even for those who have been in this country for generations. There's this general assumption that we're perpetual foreigners who don't belong. I remember back in 2016, when I was practicing as a legal services attorney, I was with my client outside of the Suffolk Probate and Family Courthouse right down the street from the State House. And I was speaking to her in Vietnamese, and she was a new immigrant, when this man rode by with his bike and said, "Get thee out of my country, you don't belong here." And this is one of many such instances that have happened to me. And I know that there are many other stories, far worse stories out there. And unfortunately, anti-Asian stigma has only gotten worse within the last 12 months since the start of the COVID pandemic. According to a recent data, we've seen an increase of 150% of anti-Asian violence. Since March of 2020, nearly 3,800 incidents have been reported by Stop AAPI Hate. None of this is okay. The Atlanta mass murders have brought anti-Asian hate crimes to the forefront, and I'm encouraged to see that these crimes are getting the coverage that they deserve, and I hope that this energy and enthusiasm for real reform will continue to mount with the support of folks like you here. But I also want to reiterate Sam's point that hate crimes are not specific to the Asian community. Bias-motivated crimes based on religion, disability, gender identity, and gender remain at troubling high numbers. Later, you will hear from a victim of a hate crime, and we thank her for her bravery in sharing her story. We must do better as a Commonwealth, not only to empower victims like her so they don't feel isolated and ignored, but also hold perpetrators accountable. And that's why I'm so proud to join the Attorney General and Senator Hines in filing the hate crimes bill to rework our current statutes to better reflect their intended purpose, to charge individuals who target a person based on their membership in a protected class, to increase accountability. Hate crimes are not just against individuals. These crimes are meant to terrorize entire communities. These are crimes against all of us. Hate crimes, much like terrorism, are designed to create fear and make people feel unsafe. We need to name them for what they are, hate crimes. And we need to prosecute them to an added degree to tell the community that we see them, that they are valued, and that we won't tolerate such violence and hate. And I also want to note that hate crime laws are one of many solutions, since we need a multifaceted solution to deal with racism and hate and support vulnerable communities. We need to work on issues of racial, social, economic, gender justice, including fighting for equity in areas of access to housing, transportation, healthcare, and other basic necessities. We also need to work on issues of language access. Furthermore, we need better education for K-12 students to learn diverse and inclusive curriculum that's intentionally designed to avoid perpetuating gender, cultural, ethnic, or racial stereotypes and build racially and culturally responsive knowledge and combat racial and cultural bias. We also need to provide opportunities for people convicted of hate crimes to learn about racism and how their actions affect whole communities. That's the transformative justice that we're seeking. And moreover, we need to invest in community-based organizations to support victims in communities affected. Being a silent bystander is no longer an option. We need to invest in upstander training to teach people how to stand up against racism and discrimination, either for themselves or as allies in a safe way. And so I'm so glad to partner with Attorney General Maura Healey and Senator Hines on this important issue. And I look forward to working with you all and incorporating your feedback so we can get best possible bill signed into law this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Representative Nguyen, and for your remarks. And we're now going to be moving on to the overview and big picture that will be talked about by Attorney General Maura Healey.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Sam, for moderating today's discussion. Thank you to the panelists, Representative Wynn, Senator Adam Hines, who co-sponsored this important bill, and also my colleague Asha White from my Criminal Bureau, and Yvonne Espinoza Madrigal from the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, as well as Evelyn Dolan, whose strength and bravery we appreciate in her sharing her story today. You know, I was reading the articles this morning recounting what happened in New York City on a Manhattan street, and that vicious attack on a 65-year-old Filipino woman. A man approached and literally kicked her in the stomach and then proceeded to kick her in the head out of nowhere. It's horrifying. It's so wrong. And what's also problematic and wrong and disheartening is the fact that people witnessed that and did nothing. And in fact, employees within the safe confines of a luxury hotel apartment literally closed the door. So what does that say about where we are as a society? And what does that say about the work that we need to do? As Representative Wynn said, these have been incredibly challenging times, particularly for our Black and Brown families, for our AAPI communities, for our immigrant communities, for the LGBTQ community. It's been incredibly frightening. And as we recover from a pandemic, as we address centuries-long systemic racism and continue to fight to secure basic human rights, we have to rise to the occasion and meet this moment. Here's what's happening here and across this country. Hate crimes and other hate and bias motivated conduct have increased. That's the fact. From anti-Asian violence, attacks on immigrants, Black, indigenous people, people of color, racist graffiti, slurs, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia. what we've seen happening in our communities is unacceptable. It can't be tolerated. And it's really corrosive to the kind of communities we're trying to create and aspire to in this country. Unfortunately, we've seen this growth occur among what seems to almost be a license in some way. Some of this has become so pervasive that it's become so normalized. And of course, it hasn't helped when it's been furthered by those in office or in public political places. But it's real, it's happening. The Justice Department just put out a memo prioritizing the prosecution of hate crimes in this country. And they did that for a reason, because white supremacy, extremism, terrorism, and hate crimes are on the rise. There's no place to make excuses for this violence. What we need to do instead is acknowledge that these incidents are happening in our communities, call them out, name them for what they are, and address them immediately. And part of that means prosecuting these violent acts as hate crimes. That's why it was so troubling to me as a member of law enforcement to hear a local official after the Atlanta massacre and that horrific murder 2 weeks ago, to say that the perpetrator had simply, quote, had a bad day. Now, call it what it is. What happened in Atlanta is a hate crime. And a hate crime is what happened in New York City. So we need to work together to name it for what it is, to bring that accountability, to make sure that victims get the support that they need, and obviously to continue with the education and the work to reduce the likelihood of these incidents in the first place. There's no room for passivity in the face of hate. And that's what brings us together this morning. So, I have been in this work for a while. Some of you may know I started in the Attorney General's office back in 2007 as chief of the Civil Rights Division, where we pursued, violations of our hate crimes laws and statutes and tried to focus on prevention and outreach. More recently, we created a hate crimes hotline as a resource for residents. We've provided guidance to schools to prevent and address hate-based incidents, particularly those impacting our young people. We've gone to court and obtained civil injunctions under the Massachusetts Civil Rights Act to protect the rights of our residents. We've worked to try to establish trusting relationships with vulnerable communities to make sure they feel safe and to make sure they feel comfortable in coming forward to government to represent and protect them. We've conducted trainings for law enforcement, local officials, and community groups on how to recognize, address, and report hate. And we've designated prosecutors to handle hate crime referrals and investigations. But I'll tell you, based on our work, we know that our laws do not meet the moment. And that's what this hate crimes legislation is seeking to achieve, giving us the tools to allow us to rid our communities and bring that of the kind of pernicious hate that we see and to hold those accountable who need to be held accountable. And that's why I'm delighted to partner with Senator Hines and Representative Wynn and happy to have the opportunity to talk about this today. This legislation is really important. It's really, really important because, as Representative Wynn said, it is an affront not just to the victim, the individual. It's an affront to entire communities. And, we've got to recognize, how painful that is and the consequences of that trauma are. And we need to recognize our collective interest in ensuring that we do all that we can to stop that. And so I look forward to today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney General Healy, and for your remarks and your thoughts there. And we'll now be moving on to Senator Hines, who will be giving us a summary of the bill.
Thank you, Sam. And Attorney General, Representative Asha, Yvonne, Evelyn, it really is great to partner with you all on this important issue. Look, this is a scary time in our country, in our Commonwealth, in our communities. Attacks and harassment certainly aren't new, but as we've been hearing today, the rise of white supremacy is frightening. Anti-Asian hate, anti-Semitism, anti-trans violence, hate crimes against African Americans, Latinx community, Muslims, immigrants, others. We're seeing these increases, and these are the only ones that have been reported. And it's probably we know it's far beyond that. And that's why we've all been compelled. You simply cannot stand by when we see any hate crime, let alone stand by when attacks on individuals and communities are increasing right here in Massachusetts. And so in the first instance, this bill is about saying loudly and clearly that violent bigotry is not acceptable. And it's clear that more needs to be done. And each of us has a stake, as we've been talking about, in ensuring that we have a strong response to violent bigotry, encountering the special impact that hate crimes have on victims and communities. And yet, and I'll talk about this now, when prosecutors have wanted to move forward with charges in cases involving hate crimes, they haven't always had the tools to do so effectively. And a lack of clarity with our own hate crime statutes has at times resulted in such charges not being pursued or accepted. And Asha will help us kind of walk through some of those instances. Therefore, this is also an effort to address known shortcomings. It's an effort to promote equity and justice by protecting vulnerable communities. And it's a deliberate effort to ensure that we have the framework right here for an effective response. So what does it do? We're going to try to work through some of the shortcomings that we've heard about and make sure that Massachusetts has the ability to create a response to bias-motivated crimes and take this into the 21st century. So some of the major changes are the following. We start by combining what was previously two related but separate statutes that, when taken together, would achieve the goal of a prohibition on violent, threatening, or destructive conduct. And by combining these statutes, we can better clarify what is considered such conduct and what the punishment should be. So right at the start, the bill incorporates what is now Section 37 of Chapter 265 and its prescription of civil rights violations not tied to membership in a protected class. The bill is very clear in trying to provide clear definitions, giving guidance to attorneys, law enforcement, and members of the judiciary seeking to apply these laws fairly and correctly. For example, related to bodily injury and harassment, the previous statute had a minimal definition of bodily injury and didn't touch harassment at all, or on what constitutes infringement of rights, or what constitutes a threat, including related to conduct or acts conducted electronically. For example, the previous statute spoke in very broad terms about what is considered a threat. And so this proposal gets into the specifics and for both what is prohibited and for the penalty connected to an act. The bill clarifies that an offender must intentionally select the victim based on the victim's perceived race, color, religion, national origin, ethnicity, caste, immigration status, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. Separately, the bill clarifies that we're focused on preventing or prohibiting violent, threatening, and destructive conduct, not the First Amendment protected expressions of hate. We can go into that further. We go further in differentiating between the various crimes, setting different punishments according to the severity, while still providing judges with the discretion to sentence accordingly, and without establishing any new mandatory minimum sentences. And I want to stress this. This does not create new mandatory minimums. This is a big one for me, and I've been clear about it throughout this process, and particularly given recent criminal justice reforms that we've undertaken in the legislature, that the aim, and that has indicated that the aim now is to move away from mandatory minimums. And so this is very clearly the case here as well. This is not creating a new law, it's improving what we have on the books so that we can promote a consistent and fair application of the law. And finally, we work to ensure that the most sensitive bias-motivated crimes are given the full attention of the courts and law enforcement. And so the bill places the most severe crimes in the exclusive jurisdiction of Superior Court. Those are just a few of the main points I wanted to hit. We'll obviously talk about it now. You can contact any of us afterwards, and the bill is online already. I'll just close by saying this. In this work, you really come to the realization that you may hope that the natural course of events leads to a steady movement towards progress, but instead it requires all of us here on the panel and watching online, requires all of us to do the work. And we need to be as deliberate as possible in the spheres of influence that we have impact on to take the steps needed for progress. And that's what we're trying to do here today. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hines, and for giving us, your insight, also just breaking down what the bill would actually do. So with that being said, we're going to be moving on to prosecutor remarks from Asha White. So Asha, the floor is yours.
All right, good morning, everyone. And thank you to all the panelists, and thank you to Senator Hines for a perfect introduction to what I'm going to talk about, which is the problems with the current bias-motivated crimes that we have on the books, and how our law, the law that we are proposing, would greatly improve upon the existing ones. The current laws are unclear, they're unnecessarily confusing, they're unnecessarily separate, and as a result, they're ineffective and very difficult to enforce. So I apologize for using a PowerPoint. I think a visual aid is going to help, though. And I'm going to start from the current slide. So as Senator Hines mentioned, these are our current laws, sections 37 and 39 of Chapter 265. And I'm going to run through it fairly quickly. Section 37 is what we refer to as the civil rights violation law. So it penalizes interference with the rights and privileges of another person secured by the Commonwealth or US Constitution, okay? Section 39 is what has commonly been referred to as the hate crimes law. That punishes specifically assaultive behavior that turns violent, where someone actually attempts to harm someone or harm someone because of someone's race, color, religion, etc. Some additional protected classes in there as well. Here is the problem with the current laws. I'm sorry, I should say laws with an S. So the first problem with Section 37, that's the civil rights violation one. It doesn't define the intent necessary to commit the crime. Actually, in the statute, it doesn't really define it. So in all of our laws, we have an intent requirement, right? What's your intention? The problem with that is many judges and prosecutors incorrectly understand it that it must be as a result of someone's protected class. Section 37 actually doesn't require that at all. And the courts have interpreted that and explained that. The problem is, because it's not written into the statute, and these are complicated areas of law, when judges, prosecutors, and lawyers read the statute, they assume it must be because of someone's race, religion, etc., which is actually not really the requirement. It also has no explanation as to what rights and privileges are secured means, right? So even for people who have gone to law school and graduated law school, we can all tell you that is a very, very complicated area that we don't normally deal with in criminal law. Civil rights often is on the civil side. We don't deal with it a ton in criminal law. So a lot of times it can just be difficult for people with a lack of experience, even who have law degrees, to understand what that really means. That causes it to be unclear and misleading. So I prosecuted these cases as a district attorney. I defended them as a defense lawyer, and I presided over hearings to determine whether there was enough information to charge these as an assistant clerk. So from all sides, I can tell you there are two big confusions when these cases come before the court. Number one, judges and prosecutors often believe that it must be because of a protected class, like I said, which is not the case. And number two, they believe that rights and privileges has to be related to an activity that we normally associate with civil rights. So voting or going to a protest or going to a march, when rights and privileges can be as simple as the right to live in your own home, the right to walk down a public street, the right to use public transportation. But because it's not written into the statute, it gets dismissed often as not applicable to fact patterns where it really should apply. Over to Section 39, remember, this is the hate crimes one now that involves violence. It doesn't explain, so this actually does have a requirement that it must be because of a protected class. It doesn't explain what because of means. Now, there's what we call case law from the higher courts that actually do explain it, and we've taken that and just put it into our statute. The problem with not putting it in the statute is that you're asking judges, prosecutors, lawyers to then have to go research what that term means. Yes, we could argue that's part of our job, but not everyone's going to do that. And with something that's a really sophisticated area of law, it really should be explained in the statute. So when anybody picks up a copy of that, they can read it with no problem. In addition to that, Section 39 is very general in the behavior it punishes. So the sentencing becomes really illogical. And I'll talk about that. So here's what the new proposed law does, okay? What the new proposed law does, like Senator Hines says, it combines two laws into one. It's really part of the same civil rights sentencing structure or idea. So it's really now two laws combined into one. That's important because it's hard enough, like I said, to get people to then have to go back and research one law. Imagine now requiring police to have to go read two separate laws to try and figure out what applies. So now we've combined it into one clear law. It codifies the meaning of because of. So when I say codify, we put it right in the law. And what that means is it has to be a contributing factor to the assault or the battery. And it doesn't have to be the only factor, okay? Doesn't have to be the only factor. So other factors like hostility, revenge, anger, or a fight that was caused initially in traffic or whatever it is, doesn't exclude a hate crime being charged. The courts have already decided that. We're just putting it in the statute to be more clear. It also expands and adds gender and immigration status as protected classes. As we know, we have what I would call hate groups that are misogynist and might discriminate or harm someone based on their immigration status. It also explains what the qualifying behavior is and what protected rights and privileges are. The definitions are right there, paragraph by paragraph. And I'll finish up. It makes sentencing proportional to the actions that someone does. So what that means is in Section 39 particularly, it creates the same potential maximum penalty for someone who might punch someone and break someone's nose and someone who might stab someone and puncture a lung and almost kill them. Okay, we're not excusing breaking someone's nose, but we believe that using a weapon where someone is seriously harmed should carry a bigger potential maximum penalty, not a minimum mandatory, just a bigger potential maximum penalty. It also strengthens the penalties for repeat offenders. 39 and 37 don't have anything if you've been convicted of this before. So if someone is a repeat offender, continues to harass someone, we have stronger penalties. Overall, it improves the language and construction and structure of the laws that we have. And that's 90% of what will make it easier to enforce. So I know that was a quick rundown. So I would love to take your questions in the Q&A period, and sorry for going over time.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Asha. And thank you for providing your insight and input on this. We're now moving the conversation over to Evelyn Dolan. And Evelyn, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for having me. I know we don't have a whole lot of time, so I'm just gonna kind of give you guys my experience in a nutshell. I moved my family here over into this area about 3 years ago. I have a 16-year-old daughter. It's weird because, you know, we've all experienced, or maybe most of us experienced some type of racism, harassment in our lives. But for me, I never thought that the harassment would be in my home, my safe place, my family's safe place. And it was. My neighbor has called me the N-word. He has yelled out the window. He yelled my name across the yard. He has stood over the fence to film us. He harasses my company when they come over. He has even taunted my at the time 15-year-old daughter. He stands on the porch and holds up bananas and jumps around like a monkey, aiming at us. It's been a real terror. So one of the things I want to talk about is that at one point I had to call the police. This is one of the many times I called the police. When the police got here, I walked down my driveway to meet him. As I approached the police, I was telling him that I'm the one who called you, and I started to explain that this man has come into my yard. He is verbally assaulting me. I am afraid for my life. He is in my yard. by this time, the neighbor has gone back to his house. The police, as I'm talking to him, walks away from me and goes over to the neighbor's house. And I'm standing there kind of puzzled because I called them. He comes back out a few minutes later and proceeds to walk past me saying, well, they said that's not what happened. I said, well, how can I get a restraining order or a no trespassing order? You can't. And he got in his car and drove off. I stood there in tears because I could not believe that the person who was supposed to be here to help me was not helping me. Once he left, I stood there and I thought, you know what, Evelyn? No one's going to help you. This man is going to be able to continue to harass you and demean you and talk down to you, and no one's going to do anything. So I said, I'm going to have to take matters into my own hands. So I started recording him, doing the things that he was doing, you know, over the fence, calling us names, harassing my guests. And at that point, Sergeant Williams and Detective Clark came into my life. I was a little leery at first because they're officers as well, and I just didn't know, you know, if anybody was going to do anything. Detective Clark introduced me to Sarah. Sarah Koch works for the Attorney General's office. And she came to meet with me and my family, and we talked to her and explained to her what was going on and what was happening and how we were being harassed. And she took matters into her own hands. She started coming by and we were talking about the case and what we were going to do. And she helped us so much. She really did. And I'm so grateful and thankful for the Attorney General's office and for Sarah and for the detective that helped as well. It's been a nightmare. This man just continues to harass us for no reason. We've never done anything to him. You know, we stay in our own yard. He tells us to turn our in music down. You know, it's a horror. So the one thing I want to say to people, I guess the message that I would send out to anyone who's going through this is do not give up. There are people out there that will help you. And Sarah was one of them for me. And I appreciate the fact that I was heard and I was listened to and she saw me. And thank you, Sarah. I don't know if you're listening now, but thank you. So it's been a horrifying event. And my daughter had to see this man verbally attack me in our own yard. I don't let her go outside by herself anymore. She's almost 17 years old now, you know, just sitting in the backyard. I stopped letting her do that. I stopped letting her walk around to the park. You know, my nephew was not allowed to go in the backyard to shoot basketball by himself. It's just been a mess. And I just felt helpless. But I think things are going to get better this year. I'm hoping that he will, you know, leave us alone and continue to stay in his yard. And that's all I can do right now. But I do appreciate the help and the assistance that I did get from the Attorney General's office and from Sarah. It was well received. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn. And you know, I don't want to just move on too quickly and just give us some space and just want to thank you for sharing and courage to be here today. And just incredibly grateful that you chose to come forward with this. And so just wanted to make sure that, you know, didn't just move on without giving us some space. And
I'm sorry, it's just, you know, it's hard to talk about. It's hard to imagine that someone, you know, doesn't like you just because you're different than them. And it's hard. It was hard on my daughter, you know, to see this man call me a black bee, a N-word, you know, right in front of my daughter. She was 15 at the time.
thank you, Evelyn.
Thank you.
And I think going forward with this program, we'll be moving on to civil rights advocate Yvonne Espinoza Matrigal. And so welcome, Yvonne, and the floor is yours.
Ms. Dolan, I want to thank you for sharing your powerful story. It is really touching. And the words you used, terror and horror are exactly what we're talking about here. This is an issue of safety, of access to justice, and of dignity for you and your family. And I am sorry that you're going through those things. And I am delighted to hear that the Attorney General's office has been supporting you. And at Lawyers for Civil Rights, we're doing similar work for other people just like Ms. Dolan, who have been victims of hate and victims of hate crimes. Most recently, the Vasquez family in East Boston, which were violently attacked, physically attacked by two white people for speaking Spanish in public. Your experience, Ms. Dolan, unfortunately, is not isolated. And that's why we need the legislative protection that we are talking about here today. And I want to thank Representative Wynn, Senator Hines, and the Attorney General for putting forth this proposal to keep you, the Vasquez family, and other people in our communities safe. We are fully supportive of this precisely because of the story that we just heard. This needs to stop. And even though this bill, as other panelists have said, is not a silver bullet, it will go a long way in making sure that perpetrators are held accountable and that this type of violence that has been visited on the Vasquez family in East Boston or on Ms. Dolan is not normalized and is actually brought to justice, because that is what people like Ms. Dolan deserve. So I want to thank Ms. Dolan again for sharing her story, and I will pass the baton back to our moderator to lead us into the Q&A. And I just want to be clear that at Lawyers for Civil Rights, we are fully supportive of measures that protect people of color and immigrants against stigma and bias-motivated crimes. This bill is long overdue. Thank you for your leadership, Attorney General, and for convening us this morning.
Thank you, Yvonne. We're at the conclusion of the speaking portion, and so for the remaining 15 minutes, we will be moving into the Q&A section. And so you should be having a couple questions. We have our first question, I believe, that's in my thing here. It's kind of to Representative either Nguyen or Senator Hines. Does the legislation cover women as a protected class?
Go ahead, Representative.
So the legislation would add in immigration status and gender to the list of protected class. So yes, it would. Thank you for the question.
Mm-hmm. And thank you. And I think, I should have done this right before moving into the Q&A. There is an outpour of support within the comment section for Evelyn for sharing her story. So again, just wanted to reiterate, thank you, Evelyn.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So there's a question from Marcela Garcia from the Globe. What is Evelyn's recourse now under our current hate crimes law, and what would it be under the proposed bill? Would charging her neighbor be easier / faster under the proposed legislation?
So my answer would be yes. And faster, I wouldn't say faster. The criminal justice system moves at a certain pace, and that is often problematic. I don't think changing a law necessarily makes the overall criminal justice process faster. That's a larger issue. I certainly think it would make it easier because it would give law enforcement, police officers, and assistant district attorneys the tools to charge it far easier than they did before. And again, I want to stress, simply because someone is charged doesn't mean they don't have their day in court. If someone wants to come in and argue that it wasn't about that motivation, they're free to do that. This is about giving law enforcement and individuals in Evelyn's position the mechanism to go forward and make that sort of complaint or allegation.
I just maybe would hit really one other point, that when you look at the bill as filed, there's pretty extensive definitions of harassment in each of these definitions, which compared side by side with the existing statute, it's night and day. And to Asha's point, it kind of gives more tools to law enforcement and others.
Yeah, and I think that clarity is really important because, look, I have worked with and talked to so many police departments and others in law enforcement, and I'll be really honest, the tools weren't there. The clarity in the statutes, the definition, as Asha says, made it such that these were not really able to effectively prosecute, okay? And they result in dismissals. And that's what's so important, and that's why I think that, we got to get this done. We obviously got to train on it. We got to make sure that police, understand, which we will work to do so that they understand the tools they have available to them. And then we'll also work with the courts so they understand and court magistrates understand, so getting this passed is one thing. And then obviously we've got to work on the training and the education. But I think this will make a big difference and also set a tone and send a message about the seriousness of these instances and the way we need to treat them.
Another question is, would the bill cover crimes against those who are associated with members of a protected class, spouses, significant others, etc., are targeted to? I believe this one is for the Attorney General.
Asha, Asha
Sure.
drafted it, so you speak.
Sure. So I'm actually not 100% clear on the question, but I'll take my my best guess at that in terms of understanding what the question is. It would cover anyone who is a victim of a bias motivated crime. So if there is graffiti spray painted on a home, I think, sure, everyone who lives in that house is a victim of that crime. So even if the husband might be the target, certainly his wife and children become victims at that point. If you're sitting in a car and there's an argument between two people, and someone starts shouting off things or pulls out a weapon and threatens people, everyone inside that vehicle becomes a victim of that particular crime. Now, if you're asking if it's a one-on-one circumstance and there is some sort of language and incident that goes on back and forth, and the other family members are not present, no, it would not cover that circumstance. You do have to have a specific victim, but it certainly would cover it if people are present or live in a space, even if they're not necessarily the intended target, but they're there.
Thank you, Asha. To the legislators, can you explain the next steps? So what happens following? So now the bill has been filed. What are the next steps? What are you looking to accomplish?
You want to start, Representative, please? Okay.
Oh, go ahead, Senator.
Well, we're at the start of the legislative cycle, and so at this point, committees are still being formed and the joint rules approved, and so the bills have not been assigned a formal bill number, for example, and referred to their respective committees. And so, but I would imagine it would go to judiciary for further review, and we certainly will be pushing for an expedited consideration, including moving up a quick hearing, and so we're working on that now.
And just to quickly add too, this is very early on in the process. We are reaching out to community groups. We are reaching out to other folks to get feedback, and we want to get your input before the committee hearing process, and would love to hear from you, whether in support or if you have concerns. And so please certainly reach out to our offices. Yeah,
I think that coincides directly into my next question, which was, if people have comments, suggestions, or concerns regarding this legislation, who should they reach out to? And with regard to the 3 offices that are represented here. So I believe what we've done is we've actually put up, in order to share your feedback, you can reach out and email Alicia Rabella-Pradas at the Office of the Attorney General. This is her email. Senator Adam Hines, that is the email for Senator Adam Hines, and also for Representative Tram Wynn. And the hate crimes hotline for the Attorney General's office is listed below. So if you want to screenshot that or write that down, so this is for if you have comments or a suggestion or concerns regarding the legislation, so that folks can be heard. I have noticed the comments and read the valid concerns that have been addressed within the comments section. So just wanted to make sure that for folks that everyone's voices are heard, and that there is a community discussion about what is best for the people. In terms of the next question, I believe if someone has been a victim of a hate crime or incident, what should they do?
So obviously, report it to your local police department. You can also contact our office. We have a hate crimes hotline. I always, welcome those reports. So those are the couple of things that you need to do. Most of the cases would get prosecuted by a district attorney's office as opposed to our office, but first report to the police department, and then you can also report it to our hate crimes hotline.
And let's see, to Evelyn. Evelyn, so, what are the next steps that you're looking for as a member of the community?
We've been in a pandemic and been kind of locked up. So we really haven't been able to be out and about in our yard. And what I'm hoping for is that we have put this whole thing to bed and that he will behave himself moving forward. And that, my family's able to enjoy our space as we should be able to. This is our safe haven, and there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to let my 16-year-old daughter go outside by herself. I'm hoping that, this whole experience has set his mind straight, and that he knows that what he's doing is wrong. And we can only hope for that. Some people, we can only hope that that's going to be the case. So that's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping for a wonderful summer. And I'm hoping that this bill gets passed and that, we can move forward with fighting this, because it's horrible.
This one is for Asha. In the case that the Attorney General Healy referenced, where the 65-year-old Filipina was brutally attacked, would this legislation actually help in prosecuting the attackers and or witnesses if that had occurred in Massachusetts?
Yes. And I want to clarify, certainly with the evidence that's in that video, along with the social context that's been going on for the last year, the current, you could prosecute that under the current laws. So it's more so that if this person referenced some other sort of motivation, whether she wouldn't get out of my way when I was walking on the street, whether whatever it is, then you would get to court and the courts would interpret that as, well, there might have been something else going on, so therefore you cannot prosecute this crime. I don't know enough about this person's motivation to do what he did, whether he's alleging that, we don't know that yet. It appeared to me to be a hate crime based on what I saw. I don't know if he's alleging other motivations, but if someone was able to put forth that argument or show some sort of evidence of some other sort of argument that they had, then it would often get dismissed in court, although the victim, the 65-year-old woman, her being Asian or being perceived to be Asian, might have been a major contributing factor to what happened. So it makes it far easier for law enforcement to enforce and prosecute these crimes, because now a defendant can't just come in and say, well, this was my real motivation, so therefore, we're just going to prosecute it under the normal assault and battery statutes. And there's a case called Commonwealth v. Kelly from the mid-1990s, where the Supreme Judicial Court talked about that if we made it a substantial factor or the only factor, it would encourage defendants or suspects to then just allege some other sort of motivation, and you could never prosecute anyone. So what we're saying here is, regardless of whether he alleges something else, you can still be prosecuted. Then if that person wants to go to trial on that case and make their argument, of course, in the United States, you're free to do that and a jury can decide. But it protects it from being dismissed. It protects it from having this schism from court to court with different judges and courts treating it differently. So my answer is certainly yes. It would make it far easier to prosecute specifically that kind of crime.
Thank you, Asha. And yes, Evelyn.
I just wanted to mention that there is a court order in place against this gentleman, and so far he has been abiding by it. So hopefully that will, be the case moving forward.
Thank you. And I believe that we're running out of time, so this will be the last question that is asked, but one that is incredibly important is, how does this legislation protect immigrants and specifically undocumented people?
Sam, let me offer a response to that, and maybe others can offer some closing words. First of all, importantly, the legislation would add immigration status as a protected category. We know from our own cases that immigrant communities who have felt terrorized and under attack may be afraid to come forward. Oftentimes, too, they may have a distrust of government, particularly coming from countries where government was not so friendly towards them. And so one of the things that we want to make really clear is that immigration status is protected. We recently had a case where a landlord was threatening his tenants that he was going to report them to ICE and saying all sorts of terrible things because they were reporting really deplorable, unsanitary conditions in their apartment. And so I think it's important because it will help both provide the tools as a matter of establishing an attack based on your immigration status is a hate crime, and also messaging just more generally that this kind of conduct is unacceptable, and that immigrant communities should feel more comfortable coming forward, which is really part of what we want to engender too with this legislation. I'll also say this, I recognize that the situation that we have with respect to racism, it is the product of systemic racism, established and perpetuated through time in this country and elsewhere. We have a lot of work to do on that front, right? We have a lot of things that we got to do to address disparities in housing, healthcare, education, everything, right? But I also want to be clear that we have a job to do when it comes to holding those accountable who continue to further and perpetuate the kind of hate that we see. And I will tell you that it is important. I'm not looking to criminalize unnecessarily things that I've been a big proponent of criminal justice reform, but I want to be really clear about the connection and the tie between some of what you saw happen on January 6th in the Capitol, the rise of white supremacy and extremism, and the attacks that we have seen, against so many of our vulnerable communities. I want us to have the tools to be able to call that out, name it for what it is, and hold those accountable who need to be held accountable. It's really important, and it doesn't mean we're not going to do the other work. But the viciousness of these attacks, it's absolutely imperative that we have the tools to be able to address that. So I thank you for tuning in today, and hope you get in touch with your legislators and get them on board as well.
Thank you for that, Attorney General Maura Healey. I also want to reiterate the point that we've said over and over again, that this is one of many solutions that we're seeking to pursue, and that the legislature, there have been over 6,500 bills filed. This bill is specific to reworking the 2 hate crime statutes. And I'm seeing the comments in here. We are going to work on racial justice, social justice, economic justice, and so many other issues out there to uplift vulnerable communities. But what we're seeing right now is that there is no accountability, as you've heard from my other panelists. And so what we're, and the other thing to remember is that there are bills out there that I'm working on, that I'm pushing for, that I'm advocating for, to allow vulnerable people to be able to report crimes more safely. And so we're working in conjunction with those legislation, and we want to partner with you. And so we hope to hear feedback from you as we continue to work on this.
Great, thank you. And so as we conclude today's program, I just want to thank the panelists for being here, and for folks who have tuned in and listened and been a part of this conversation, and for the Attorney General's team, as well as the senators, and for Representative Wynn's team for helping put this together. This is a really challenging discussion, and this can't be a silver bullet. This can't be the stop and start of where we are. And I think it's absolutely critical that we work together in community, listening to those who are most impacted, listening to those who are, for the criticism and the concerns. I think those are all incredibly important to listen to. And so I encourage folks to reach out to the 3 offices, to be able to voice them and be heard, be at the table. And so that we can make sure that, whatever direction this bill goes, that it will be one that is for the people, to protect the people, and make sure that we're actually addressing the issues that are at play. So I appreciate everyone for being here. I think this was a really important conversation. I believe that we have taken a step forward, and hopefully we'll continue to work collaboratively, and one where everybody feels that we're making this Commonwealth a safer place for us all. So thank you everybody for joining, and please reach out to the 3 offices, and so that we can all get to work together. Thank you.